welcome to You Can't Make This Shit Up. David Washington, Kellen Clark, we're your political innovators here in Central Florida, and we are talking about our water. What about it, David?
Clean water. It will be, or its allies and its supporters of the right to clean water is hoping that on the November 2024 ballot here in Florida, that the right to clean water will be on the ballot. In essence, what the right to clean water is, it is this amendment creates a fundamental right to clean and healthy waters for all Floridians. And the key word here is fundamental. There are different levels of rights. Fundamental rights are the highest ones there are, like the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, etc., etc. And fundamental rights would take precedence over lower rights, such as the permitted rights that our state gives to polluters, others who would degrade our environment. Now, there's a second part to this ballot summary, and it says that this enables us, Floridians, to hold our state executive branch, the governor's house, accountable when it permits pollution, degradation of our waters, and aquatic ecosystems. That is the ballot initiative, Right to Clean Water. Kellen.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Orange County has gone for this thing before back in 2020, and the state legislature came in and shut it down. And my personal prediction is that the state Supreme Court will do the same, especially because of how they've narrowed their view. We just did one. You can't make this shit up. Reduce power to the people. Go watch it. It's great. But what we went over in that episode, by and large, was that now it is much harder to get citizen initiatives on the ballot if they accomplish multiple things. If their language is even the slightest bit vague, the court now has the ability to strike it down. This one, when you look at it, is a much more broad. They've shut down less broad bills before, less broad initiatives before, and I think that's what's going to happen to this one. I think that the court's going to interpret the holding executives accountable for permitting pollution. Like, what does that mean specifically? And I think that will be enough cause for them to shut it down.
In the spirit of full disclosure, I just want to say that before there was Jay in Washington, there was Myers in Washington, and Myers in Washington were the campaign consultants to the Right to Clean Water ballot initiative here in Orange County, Florida. So, and again, full transparency, we just want to let you know that we had prior experience with the Right to Clean Water initiative. And you're right, Kellen. Ballot initiatives are looked at in a very narrow scope. The wording, as we see in the abortion ballot initiative for November 2024, Attorney General Moody has challenged the definition of viability in that particular ballot initiative. And so, on top of all that, you have the requirements to get a ballot initiative on the ballot in November even harder, and it's difficult. It's going to be difficult, and we'll see if this particular ballot initiative survives the challenges.
I think it can survive the signatures. I think they can get people, even though they don't probably analyze too closely, what it means to have the right to clean water, what it means to having to, steward your land, the environment. But people hear clean water, they're going to like it. I think they're going to get enough signatures through that.
And I can tell you, in the 2020 ballot initiative for the right to clean water in Orange County, it had the highest vote approval ever in the history of Orange County ballots. And Orange County residents, voters, overwhelmingly voted in favor of protecting our waters here in Orange County. And unfortunately, in the next session of the General Assembly of this state legislature here in Florida, they decided to preempt the decisions made by the voters of Orange County to say, well, Orange County and other jurisdictions, you really don't have that right to protect your waters, to give natural resources like water a say in court when suing polluters or
Yeah.
holding government accountable for allowing pollution
Yeah,
to occur.
they were clear that if such a thing were to happen, they would only accept it on the state level, not on the local county level. Which I think from a lawsuit perspective does ultimately make sense. I do understand why they did it, and obviously, and of course, it was going to have the highest voter approval. You think someone's going to be in the polling room looking at their initiatives and be like, "No, I don't want clean water. Oh, I don't." No, that's not going to happen. They're going to say, "Ooh, clean water. I'll take it. I want clean water." So, but that's kind of the trickier part of the bill because it kind of lets citizens be more directly involved with their natural resources,
Correct.
which can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, when the government doesn't, do stringent enough regulation to
And
prevent
enforcement.
and enforcement to prevent the pollutants from going into the water in the first place. It can the citizens, if they want, can pick up the slack. On the other hand, citizens who don't do it right can make it worse.
Right.
And that's the other difficulty that's going to happen because if it does make it all the way through every layer and it gets on the ballot, I think it's going to pass. I think people are going to be in the voting room and be like, I love clean water. Yes. It's going to just have to see whether or not, the citizens are actually ready to take that kind of action because it's a very challenging thing. I'm from Merritt Island, Florida, on the east coast of Central Florida. That's
Okay.
where Kennedy Space Center is. It's between, the Cocoa Rockledge and Cocoa Beach. We are the home of manatees in my county in Brevard.
All right.
Um, know how the manatees are extremely endangered, which says a lot because what we encountered is a multiple foot deep pile of muck on the ground. It's a nobody like you're advised to not swim in the river. Like they'll let you boat on it and whatnot, but this muck, it's just yay. It can different parts. It varies over different parts, but it goes from this thick to like this thick.
So from like maybe several inches to about a foot.
About foot and a half is probably the
Okay.
most it probably gets. Actually, I said a few feet. It's probably exaggeration, but essentially, it's just like a pile of fertilizer and waste. A lot of it dog waste, actually.
Wow.
We have a fertilizer like hardcore restrictions during the summer. Like you cannot fertilize your lawn in the summer. But even then, the problem still gets worse and worse every single year. And citizens have tried to clean it and it's only gone kind of well.
Right.
There's a machine that's extremely expensive that can sweep the bottom, scoop up the muck, and then they repurpose and sell it as fertilizer.
Right.
But again, that's the question. The question I would bring up is, can citizens realistically clean up that much water? And even then, what's the point if by the next year
Right.
the muck is back, baby?
Exactly. Kellen, and I'm somewhat familiar with Merritt Island. Is marine activities or water recreation a large part of the local economy there?
It used to be a much bigger part of it. At one point, they had some of the world's most famous scouts before we hunted them to extinction because we're just that smart.
Wow.
But and people go out on their boats all the time. People go wakeboarding all the time.
Mhm.
You see all this stuff, but it has declined because there have been concerns over water safety. There have been very rare, mind you, so it could be some coincidence, but there have been reported cases of flesh-eating bacteria in the water.
Right.
The most of the marine life is dead. You touch that bottom, oh boy, is it icky. It is
Oh,
gross.
the
Like,
ick.
oh yeah, you basically sink into waste.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
It,
it's seen better days. Not to mention we built a causeway because we have two rivers that surround it, Indian River, Banana River. Banana River's on the east. There's a causeway going into Cocoa Beach, and it changes the water current. So sometimes waste will pile up in this one corner on the south end of the island, and it will smell over the entire region.
Are there efforts to address this in Merritt
Mm,
Island?
there are some, like I mentioned earlier, there are, but most of it is citizen led.
Mhm.
It's citizens trying to scrape up the muck and then sell it as fertilizer because it is a very good fertilizer.
Right.
But that's a very expensive, long, tedious process, and you have to get permission because there's canals. A lot of
Okay.
it's in canals, so and a lot of it's riverside property, so you have to go through that. And we do a fertilizer, restriction in the summer. You can't put your fertilizer in, um, but it is hard for the local government to actually make a strong push
Right.
for it because if you were to clean it on a large scale, that would entail a lot of funding and a lot of effort. You would, most of our natural filters are some of our marine life, like our oysters, our mangrove trees that filter the water, they don't really exist anymore.
Wetlands.
We do have there is a program that lets you farm that if you farm oysters, you get a small tax break.
Okay.
But that doesn't still only some people can do that.
Right. I know one of the arguments for having the right to clean water on the ballot is that this is good for business. This is good for the economy. And marine activity, water recreational activities are a good portion of the economy, the Floridian economy, whether it is on our beaches, on either side of the coast, or our natural springs, what you just said about Merritt Island, and but there's this pushback that is frustrating because we know that the fresh water is not going to last forever.
It can't.
And when we have our aquifers exposed to radioactive material, thank you, Mosaic, or flood waters due to hurricanes and other things like that, and the dredging, illegal dredging of the Econ River here in Orange County, um, it seems like we're not worried about the future. We're more concerned about.
And that is something that is extremely important. Environmentalism is about more than carbon emissions. When I say environment to anybody, all they talk about is, well, we're not the biggest polluters on earth, so it's not a big deal. I'm like, did I say climate change,
No, you
guys?
didn't.
No, I did not. Because there are important economic elements to the environment that people because when people think environment, they can't separate the idea that progress is to abandon it, that industrialization, which is so opposed to nature, doesn't naturally coexist with it, and that you pick one or the other. But that's just not the case. We would be so much better off if our cities just had a couple like holes in the asphalt, more holes in the asphalt, because then stormwater can actually get into the aquifers. We can't recharge our aquifers where your drinking water comes from.
Right.
We don't put heavy restrictions or even light restrictions for that matter on companies that make bottled water. During droughts, they have drained towns dry before. Nestle and Pepsi being the most notorious for it.
Right.
And if you're not willing to conserve your water, that you are shooting yourself in the foot long term, especially now that our drinking water is becoming more scarce. It's not recharging as much because of urbanization, and so much of it has been privatized. Because my one half of my family is from Utah. So naturally, we keep vaguely up to date with the Mormon church sometimes because a lot of them are involved with that. They've made an entire business out of just buying water there
Right.
because you can, because everything's privatized, even natural resources like water.
I know one of the objectives of the right to clean water is to give existing laws and regulations some teeth, and that enforcement has been lacking, and therefore we continue to have the issues that we have with pollution and not addressing the abuse of our aquifers and so forth and so on. Um, Is there a place for further government regulation
Yes.
and
Yes.
protection?
Very in short terms, absolutely.
Should be done in the courts.
I think a lot of it can, but a lot of it also needs to just happen on the legislative end. I mean, of
Mhm.
course, the courts need to be more, stringent about, putting out the full penalties and, going after offenders, instead of just the most extreme, which
And
is
I,
what we see all the time.
and I applaud the governor, Governor DeSantis, and investing more into the Everglades. But there's more issues. There's more
Yeah, no,
issues, and like you said,
the Everglades is important because it's our one of our last truly natural territories that exists left. We've a lot of rivers have become victim to eutrophication, EUTRO vacation.
explain that. What's
It's basically when you put your fertilizer on your lawn, your fertilizer releases this massive amount of nitrogen and phosphorus, but there's so much in your fertilizer that the ground and the plants can't all absorb it. It is required for them to exist. Um, and then Florida does what Florida does best, and it rains. When it rains, that excess nitrogen and phosphorus washes straight into your rivers. When
correct?
that happens, you have an excess of that in the waters. What that does is it cultivates algae. There's only a limited amount of oxygen in the water. It's not the
Correct.
same as air, oxygen, where you can just breathe oxygen from around the world. Water is completely limited,
Correct.
and so then the algae basically eats all the oxygen, kills the other plants, and other animals can't eat it. That's why like half the glades had like left a long time before we made it a national park.
Okay.
And with when it comes to further government regulation, I think there is a strong argument for less privatization over resources, because it
Yeah.
affects everybody, not just the owners. And in the way I see it, at the very least, water is ours. But I also see that citizens, and citizen groups can't possibly solve the problems on their own. They've tried in my hometown. They can't do it. It's because you have to get full clearance, because chances are you're doing some kind of operation.
Mhm.
You have to get clearance to do that. If you don't do it right, you make things just as bad, and you end up trawling the water instead of cleaning it, which
Okay.
doesn't help.
Right.
Doesn't help at all. And not to mention, what's the point in cleaning up the water if the moment you turn around it's filthy again? Yeah, I think that more local government should look into what Merritt Island did with fertilizer restrictions over the summer. It would help so many waterways and so much wildlife.
Or that's preempted by the state legislature.
Well, I mean, they didn't preempt that in Merritt Island, so I'm assuming via precedent, it is one of the redder counties. So maybe I'm maybe there's bias, but I'm guessing that because that's a very specific restriction, they would allow it. They would let it roll through.
Your final word on this matter.
I am enthusiastic about this bill, but I am also slightly skeptical. It is a good step, and I think should it get through, it could be a start for something better, but it's not going to get through the court. And that's my final word.
With the preemption, this recent legislative cycle, preempting a lot more local initiatives that would affect the environment, women's reproductive rights, business, schools, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Proponents of the right to clean water and their allies have a lot of work ahead of them. First, they have to get the matter on the ballot before anything can be said or done. If you have the opportunity, Google the right to clean water, sign the petition, help get the petition on the ballot so that all of Florida can make the decision and make the decision in an educated and well informed way.
With that, make sure to vote yes on that like button
Thank you. Thank
and
you.
subscribe and share.
Yes, yes. There's another ballot initiative that we'll talk about another day, the right to hunt and fish.
Stay tuned, folks.
Indeed.